Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first series review, where we are going to review 11 of the leadership books that we have reviewed out of the 50 books that we have reviewed so far. We started our review sessions back in May, and here we are with 50 books and the first leadership series book. This session is recorded as per the request of our colleagues, and after the recording it will be uploaded on the YouTube channel, and I will share with you the links afterwards. Today's session we are going to review 11 of the leadership series books in order, frankly, of how we started the sessions. We started with of course, one of the most referenced books in terms of leadership and management, which is Management by Drucker. And this was one of the very first books that we have reviewed, and then followed by the famous John Maxwell's two books, 5 Levels of Leadership and the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And then we had the Jim Collins Good to Great, and then we went into, of course, Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux, Turn the Ship Around, Dilemmas of Leadership, Transformational Leadership and Leader Interpersonal and Influence Skills, and then Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath, and then Charisma on Command. So we will go through key dimensions of the books rather than going through what each book states, but the 4 areas of leadership, how each one of them defines leadership. So the definition of leadership, the levels of leadership, are there levels, and how do they move up? How do people grow in maturity and in the level of awareness of their leadership capability and acumen? And then how leaders make decisions, then how the challenges of the leadership are faced, and what kind of challenges we expect in today's world and also in the future. And then in each one of those sections, so each one of those segments, we will review all the 11 authors, the 11 books, because some books have more than one author. So we will review all the 11 books. What kind of point of view did the authors have under each of those 4 areas? And then we will have, of course, after we finish, we will stop the recording and then start the discussions like we do every time. So let's start with the first point, which is the definition of leadership. So when it comes to the definition of leadership, all the authors agreed on the progression, the evolution of the leadership theory. So the very early theories of leadership always thought of great men, and people are born as leaders. And this comes back to the old history of the old empires. So the pharaonic empires, the Roman Empire and the Greek empires, and all of the empires that used to be in the world, they always believed that of the royal blood, and that the leaders are born, where they used to even nominate leaders when they were still very young and didn't make any decisions, but they thought they were from the leadership blood. So if we look at the leadership theories of how they evolved, it started with the great man theory, where it is based on the belief that people are born leaders, and this is the key word there. If you are born from the royal blood, and this comes back, like we said, to the dynasties and the old empires in the world. Then they started evolving a little bit, looking at not from which family they are born, but the traits that they show, the certain traits of how they deal with certain situations. So for example, when you look at how the leaders should be ambitious, how the leaders should be patient, how the leaders should be absorbing to different comments and all of that. So this was like they said, this was the evolution of the great man theory, when people started to realize that it's not only, you can have leaders that were born from non-royal families. Then in the modern world started the behaviorists, and the behaviorists came with the revolution of the theories of leadership at that stage, because they said, well, leaders can be made. And we have quoted before the books of The Making of a President, and several books that have spoken to how leaders can learn certain behaviors. And this is usually the behaviorist or the theory of the behaviorism, which states that if you can concentrate on what you want to learn and what you do, you can actually learn those qualities, and you can actually start learning, observing, copying, and then doing. And then you can have your own way or own style of doing it, because behaviors are learned, and this is the basis of the behaviorist theories. Then next came the situational leadership, where the quadrants of leadership depending on two different dimensions, which is the readiness levels and the skills. So from the skills level, so the readiness in terms of the skills, but also the will side, which is, are people willing and able, or unwilling but able, or not willing but willing but not able, or not willing and not able. So the four quadrants. And then based on that, you will have the situation where you need to sell, tell, motivate, and delegate. And of course, situational leadership is a completely different book that we will discuss, because it's one of the most used theories of leadership, and it will come in our next series of books. Like Dr. Jahan is saying on the comments, that the leaders, the behaviorist theory is through training. Yes, through training, people can learn behaviors. And this is the behaviorism approach, and the behaviorists in general, they believe that through training and through coaching and all different methods of development, leaders can learn new behaviors. Then we had the contingency theory, which is basically looking at the biggest prediction of effective leadership at a certain circumstances, which by default, contingency means emergency, unexpected situations, crisis management, and all of that. And this is an extension of the situational leadership theory. And when we start reviewing the book for situational leadership, we will cover both together, situational leadership and contingency theory. Then the transactional theory, which we have spoken about, and as well as the transformational theory. We've spoken about both of them and how they evolved, and today we will cover some of those as well. Transactional was focusing on rewards and benefits, and as well punishment. So if you do something, I will reward you. If you don't do it, you get punished. And this is basically transactional theory. So it's based on benefits and punishments. While in the transformational leadership and the transformational theory, which we will also cover today, is based on the 4 I's that we discussed, and we will cover today in terms of how leaders are defined. And then came 2 more theories. One of them you can find here in this table, which is inspirational theory, which relates to the charisma. And the charisma we will discuss. We discussed the book Charisma on Command, and we will also cover it in today's review of the 11 books in the leadership series. There is also another theory that came afterwards, which is the inclusive theory, or the inclusive leadership. Sometimes they call it inclusiveness. And we will also discuss that afterwards in a separate session. So those are the biggest approaches for the leadership in terms of the definition by history. When we look into Drucker as one of the most cited leadership and management authors, he focused on a lot in terms of the knowledge creation. So Drucker was so much into knowledge and into the transformation process, We discussed in the process of leadership that it's all about transforming inputs into outputs, and this is basically the process of leadership. So it's how you plan, make decisions, organize and deploy your staff, lead people, motivate them, inspire them, and all of that in order to have that in the process in order to move them into the goals attained or the goals that were set by the organization. Drucker also mentioned that previously the world in the leadership is becoming more complex than before, because in the year 1800 there were only 900 million people on earth. And if we think of in 200 years, people have been multiplied by 7 times, and this made the transformation process very complex, because when you multiply the population, you know, the leadership follower equation, when you multiply the number of people who are going through the process, because you can see here that human factor is big part of the process. So when the human is multiplied by 7 into the process, error margins are very high. Possibility of people getting it wrong is very high, and that's one of the areas that Drucker looked at, how we transfer the knowledge and how do we build the knowledge across the employees in order to ensure that they have the right skills, and also that the knowledge is not lost in the organization after the employees leave. So in a nutshell, Drucker really focused on 2 key points: the knowledge transfer and the knowledge worker, and also the process of transferring the knowledge into the knowledge worker and into the tacit and explicit knowledge that we want to transfer from one employee to the other. Then we come to John Maxwell, who is also one of the most cited people in terms of the levels of leadership as well. But he also focused on the process of transferring people into leaders and moving them into future able leaders. And he looked at the ability to empower others and the ability to leave a legacy. And that's why when we look at the 5 levels of leadership, John Maxwell focused on the highest level, which is the pinnacle, which is how people leave legacy. And we will discuss this in a moment and compare it with what Jim Collins mentioned in his book, Good to Great. So basically, definition of leadership has been agreed by the majority of the authors as someone who is able to walk people through a process of transformation, from transforming their skills, abilities, needs into goals of the organization, which is what we have explained over here, through leadership decisions, through planning, through controlling, through inspiring and motivating people, through organizing and deploying the right staff in the right time with the right resources, and organizing that, and then inspiring people. So this is basically how the definition of leadership, in order to achieve a certain goal that the organization, whether it was a profit or non-for-profit organizations, every organization in the world has goals, and every organization wants to achieve some sort of efficiency metrics and also economical benefit. Even if for non-profit organizations, economic benefit is very important, because based on that, organizations can be able to sustain themselves. Even if it's a non-profit organization, sustaining the business is very important economically. So with the definition of leadership, then, with the agreement of all leaders on the transformation process, so that the summary of the definition is that leadership is a transformational process. It transforms people from, transforms their skills and abilities into results that the organization wants. Whether you use transactional way or transformational way, or the behaviorist way, or the inclusive way, different ways you can use, but the definition is the transformation from people and skills and abilities into results. Let's look at the levels of leadership. So this is the second part of what the books cover. Are there different performance levels of leaders? And this is the most famous book which spoke about that was John Maxwell's 5 Levels of Leadership book. When he looked into leaders start with the position. So they start by earning, being promoted, being happy with what they have achieved. So they say, you know, you listen to me, I have the right to be followed, and I'm your boss, which is the normal first level of leadership. When people are newly promoted, they become in need of being followed, and they try to exert their power, which is the position. And this is basically the first level. As they go and as they mature, and after some time, they learn that people need to be emotionally engaged with the work. So they start moving into the second level, which is permission, and they start focusing on relationships. So they say, you know what? I'm pushing people, but if they believe in me, they would move faster and with less resistance. And this is the level 2, where leaders would seek permission, and they will try to make followers follow them because they want to, and this is the key, not because they have to, which is the difference between level 1 and level 2. Then as they start looking at relationships, they fall into the trap of too much pampering people, too much looking into, I'm too nice, people start taking me for granted. So I need to focus not only on being nice, but I need to focus on the results. And this is where they move on level 3, which is production. I will be good with you if you only produce, and if you don't produce, I will be, unfortunately, have to start disciplinary action. We start analyzing what happened wrong, and if there is a mistake, we have to correct it. If we are unable to correct it, then we have to take an action. And then the work starts focusing on production. And this is the most difficult step, because like we mentioned, out of the 5 levels, moving from level 3 to level 4 needs a lot of maturity and a lot of giving back attitude from the leader. Why is that? Because at level 4 is when leaders stop looking at the self-achievement. So up to level 3, you know, the leader is always looking at, you know, winning. You know, I want to achieve, and I want to achieve through my team being productive. I want to focus on the results. While in level 4, this is the beginning of the leader looking at reproduction. And reproduction means that I will start putting people into delegation. I will start preparing people to take my position. And this is basically level 4, when people would say thank you, because you are actually helping us grow, and you are helping us mature, not as followers, but as future leaders. And why this level 4 is difficult, as we have explained, because here is a moment of truth where the leader looks at himself as a future redundant employee. And this is confirmed in level 5, where the pinnacle and the leadership looks at leaving legacy behind. So level 4 and level 5 are very high levels of maturity and abundant thinking and mentality, where leaders need to really exert a lot of self-control and emotional stability in order to be able to put people into positions that will replace them eventually in the future, and not feeling threatened by others. And that's why the most difficult level, or the most difficult climb out of the 5 levels of leadership that John Maxwell has explained, is the climb from level 3 to 4. Of course, each one needs a lot of effort. So from level 1 to 2, there is learning and effort, 2 to 3, learning and effort, 4 to 5, learning and effort. But from 3 to 4 is a lot of self-control and energy that needs to be put into developing people, rather than looking at self only. Randa is asking, what are examples of level 5 leaders? Level 5 leader is basically someone who focuses on legacy. So what is a practical example of that? Someone who would go and delegate a follower to be in his position for a certain amount of time, to take his seat for 1 day a week, to rotate people in and focus on growing, making himself redundant eventually. So he is someone that people look up to as the mentor, the guide, someone whom we appreciate for making us being a leader. So in this level, leaders, I will give you some of the examples that occur. In several organizations, leaders, they would, when they go on vacation, they would leave someone in their position and they will give him full empowerment to make decisions while they are not around. And knowing that they might shine, and actually when they come back from a vacation, they might have even done a better job than the leaders themselves. And they don't fear that, but they feel proud of their decision to put them forward into that area. Another example, I have seen also leaders in organizations who do rotation in terms of leadership. So they say, 1 day a week, I will not make decisions, but I will delegate someone to sit on my desk 1 day a week, and whatever decisions come, they will be the ones to brainstorm and lead and make a decision into this area. It takes a lot of courage, because the leader by contract is responsible for the outcome. So he is taking the risks, but he is also being proud of growing people into their into his position in the future. Ahmed is saying raising a lieutenant. Yes, it's a second in command. It's the being able to put someone, knowing that this person will eventually replace you, growing them, grooming them, and you are not scared of that. Actually, if you look at the definition of Jim Collins, this is very similar. So if we look at the 5 levels of leadership Jim Collins spoke about, and when we compare them to Maxwell, they are all together in terms of the number 2, 3, 4, and they had the same definition, and they only changed the wordings of level 1 and level 5. So when we look at the wordings of Jim Collins in terms of level 1, is the someone who is capable, talented, has the good skills, which is exactly what Maxwell mentioned. But the Collins just worded differently in terms of capable, while Maxwell focused on the power. They have to, because they have to follow me. Also, when we look at level 5, Jim Collins looked at the blend of humility and professional will. So someone who is really humble and is giving people the command, which is basically what Maxwell mentioned, which is basically respect and being respected because you are leaving a legacy behind you. So if we want to look at Collins, how is he different from Maxwell? Collins really focuses on the people, and this is what is special about the book of Collins, Good to Great, is that he says if you select the right people, even if they don't have the skills, but they have the values and they have the discipline that Collins spoke about in terms of his Hedgehog Concept, which we will discuss in a moment. If you focus on people who are having the right values and then you train them, then this is level 5 leadership. You focus on who first, then the task next. So who does the task and then the task next. While he looked at level 4 leader is someone who looks at the task first and then who does it. If we want to define this in terms of the HR definition, so level 5 leader is someone who looks at value-based recruitment. So it's value-based recruitment. I'm focusing based on the values. While level 4 is what is focused on competency-based recruitment. on skills. So, and this is one of the key differences that Jim Collins highlights in his book, that Maxwell did not stress the same as Collins in his model of 5 levels of leadership, that the top level of leadership in Jim Collins' view is someone who is really able to select people for the right values, and while level 4 is someone who focuses on the skills of people and the abilities of people of what they can do, based on what kind of competencies we need now for the organization. While level 5 is what kind of values do we need now in the organization in order to drive the organization forward. I personally really look at Jim Collins' model as one of the most admired models in my own personal point of view, because this is what personally I have seen in organizations. One of the key reasons of success is if people have the right values and the right attitude. Skills can be learned. I mean, to bring someone not being able, if we look at, for example, how you train people on doing a certain task, if you do this in 6 months with a condensed course, they can learn it. But making people learn values like trust and patience and all of that, exactly like what Sam is mentioning, trust and others, is not something that people can learn in 6 months, not even in 6 years. Sometimes people spend their lives not being able to learn. And Atiyah correctly is mentioning integrity. Of course, people sometimes spend their whole life not learning integrity. So if you select the right people first, which is level 5 leadership, this becomes a lot of courage. And that's why Jim Collins mentioned that it is level 5, because it takes a lot of courage to select the people with the values, and making a little bit risky decision in terms of what if they don't have the right skills. So if you have someone who is, let's say 10 out of 10 in skills, but 5 out of 10 in values, you will not take them. And while if you have the opposite, 10 out of 10 in terms of your required values, but 5 out of 10 in terms of the skills, you will recruit them. It takes a lot of courage and risk, exactly like what Randa is saying. So that's what level 5 leadership is, being confident and trusting in the who first before the what, rather than level 4, which is what first, then the who. Sam is saying that this type of selection would not be across all levels. Senior management, yes, but going to mid-management, it should be on level 4. It's debatable, Sam. So the concept, of course, is debatable, because the more you bring in people, even on the operational level, I'll give you examples. Let's look at a service agent. So this is like the most baseline customer-facing position. If you hire somebody with the right skills, so excellent on computer, emails, English language, writing letters and all of that, but they have the wrong attitude, they might spoil your customer-facing department. While if you bring someone with the right attitude, but they really need to learn skills like computer analysis, Excel sheets and PowerPoints and all of that, they can learn it within few months, but you have the right attitude. So it's debatable in a way. Dr. Amal is asking if the session is recorded. Yes, it is recorded and will be uploaded on the YouTube after we finish. So Nisreen is also asking a question. How can you know the values on someone who is applying for a new job in the company? Excellent question, Nisreen. And we will debate that and we will explain it in our HR series, where we are going to look at the behavioral and values-based recruitment. And this is basically what we are mentioning here. There is a difference between behavior-based interviews and values-based interviewing and competency-based interviewing. So one of the interviews you interview for skills and competencies, one of the interviews you interview for behaviors, and there is a difference between both of them. Dr. Agada is asking if there is a group that we put the lectures on. Yes, there is a group on WhatsApp, and we will circulate the link. And there is a YouTube channel that will also circulate the link as well after the lecture. Ahmed Al-Attar is saying that's why the probation period is important, and absolutely, probation period is made for testing that your recruitment process was correct. And the probation period is exactly like the engagement period in terms of marriage. Why do people get engaged, and why is there some sort of a testing period? Because when you see people in an interview, you see them in a way when you actually try them in under different circumstances, different situations, pressure and stress situations, crisis, and all of that. You see the real them, and we will discuss that in the HR series. And this is basically, what Freud mentioned in terms of the ego, superego, and id, and what lies beneath under the water. We will discuss that definitely in terms of how we make the proper selections. When we look as well into the book of Inspirational Leadership by Riggio and Tan, he mentioned the PONS, which is the profile of non-verbal sensitivity, and the importance of leadership, emotional intelligence, and he defined the different levels of leadership in a different way, both of them, Riggio and Tan, where they looked at the how the leaders are able to exert emotional intelligence and being able to show people not only through words and through their skills and capabilities, but also through their non-verbal intelligence, which is basically, as we can see, facial expressions, body language, and other areas that we looked at. And this was the basis of the assessment center. So all of you hear about psychometrics and why people do psychometric testing for leadership and all of that. This was all based on the very old research of the PONS, where they looked at patterns like verbal battery and verbal ability testing, non-verbal ability testing, and all of that. So this is another dimension, which is the inspiration and the emotional intelligence. And then we come into the levels of information processing. And this model was developed by several American psychologists, namely George Miller and his colleagues, where they looked into the information processing, where some information, if there is some sort of attraction, if there is some sort of attention, then the people will get the attention, and then it will be processed through the sensory memory. And then if it is repeated, then it goes into the short-term memory. If it's rehearsed, it is reviewed, and it's properly mentioned in a story, so via encoding, then you get a long-term memory. The model that was developed by Miller and his colleagues is basically the model that many people talk about in terms of role modeling. We always hear about leaders and how they should be role models. And basically, this is based on the model of Miller and his colleagues. Because what Miller mentioned is that in order for people to be role models, they need first to show people something. When you show them, it will come in the short-term memory if you are able to grab their attention. Let me give you an example. So if the leader is being, let's say, coming early to the office, so this will be unnoticed unless they are showing attention. So they kind of walk in the office, they show people that they are here, they show them several times, then it becomes into short-term memory. Then when they tell a story about the importance of coming early and how they they have succeeded in achieving their goals and all of that, and they keep on repeating that, it goes into the long-term memory. And the long-term memory is what then, based on the model that was developed by Chris Argyris, will form the inference that people would remember. And what happens is what people see will constitute a belief for them, and then based on that it will form an assumption and then a belief, and then they will do a certain behavior, which is basically they will copy the leader, and they will be able to retrieve that memory when they need it, and they will be able to copy the leadership behavior. And this model that was developed by Chris Argyris, along with what Miller has developed in terms of the information processing, constitutes the base ground for role modeling and why role modeling is important. So those are the levels of leadership. We then come into the decision. So Dr. Amal is commenting on that point, is that once they copy it and the the employees do what the role models are doing, it becomes part of their personality. And yes, absolutely, Dr. Amal, it does come into their part of the personality, because what happens is, like we say, repetition is the key to success. And that's why in schools and in all universities people repeat, and when people want to study something they keep on repeating it, because in order for the memory, for the information to be processed according to Miller and his colleagues, you need to do an attention. So attention needs to be there. So you need to remember something, an event, something that has occurred, and then maintain and rehearse, keep on repeating, and then encode it in a way that it is a story. And that's why, by the way, if you look at how many students have been able to study books, majority of them have been able to do it via singing, via looking into the book as a story, via linking some chapters of the book to a certain story that they know. So this is all under encoding. And then it goes into the long-term memories, and this is always what makes people believe in something. Once it goes into the long-term memory, then you start applying Chris Argyris model, which is the inference ladder. And this was also used by Peter Senge in his book, The Fifth Discipline. It was referred to, where what you see then gets you patterns, and then the patterns would form an assumption, and then the assumption would form meanings, and then meanings would form belief, and then the belief will control a behavior, and then, like you mentioned, Dr. Amal, it will become part of their personality. So let's look into leadership decisions. And what did people mention about leadership decisions? The authors, we start looking at Chip and Dan Heath, where they in their book Decisive, they looked at the RAP model, and they in the RAP model they mentioned 4 key areas. One, increase your options. It's very important to avoid narrowing the options, and then test them in terms of reality. Check that they are logic and they are able to be applied in real practice, and then attain distance in order to be objective. So check that you are not consciously biased to your decision, because in many cases, many leaders would fall into the trap of the conscious bias, and they will just favor their decision, even if it is not the best decision and it's not well analyzed. And then prepare to be wrong, and this is very important. So we link that into the Dunning-Kruger effect, and the Dunning-Kruger effect is what Collins have referred to in his book, when he looked at the levels of confidence, and he said that people with very high levels of confidence are this is the Dunning-Kruger, both of the scientists, Dunning and Kruger, both of them have developed this model after their work on the personal ability to recognize their own competencies. And they looked at people who know nothing, where they actually call them Mr. Stupid, that they are unable, they have very high levels of confidence. As people move ahead, they start falling into despair because they find that they only know a little, and those are always the scientists and the researchers, that the people, the more you know, the more that you feel less confident, for a very simple reason, that you will discover how small your capability and your memory is. Because if we look at researchers in the world, there are millions of researchers. I'm just one of them. So the more you have confidence in what you know, the more that it makes you less knowing. So you don't need to have this 100% confidence. Nobody has this except if they know nothing. So then once you fall into despair, you know, asking yourself a question, am I right or wrong? Then you start going into enlightenment, and this is basically what they have discussed in, you know, Dunning and Kruger, that when you start getting enlightened, then this is where you feel confident, and then the level of confidence never crosses like something or 70 or 80% when you become an expert. And those are always the scientists in their approach, like Randa is saying, and you know, and all of that. When people are knowledgeable, and always when you meet scientists, they will always tell you, show me how. There isn't a true scientist or an expert or a researcher who will tell you impossible, because they know that there is progression of research. If we looked 10 years back and we thought that there will be a spaceship that goes all the way to the space and come back totally intact on Earth, nobody would say it is possible, except scientists would say one day it is possible. Why? And now SpaceX has done it, Elon Musk has done it, and we know that maybe in the future there will be people who are going to beat that technology with a better way. So always when the more you know, the more you are enlightened, the more that you will have semi-confidence, which what we call, you know, like 70 to 80% confidence. 100% confidence is something that only people who know nothing, according to Dunning-Kruger, and this is what Jim Collins supports. And that's why Jim Collins says that the most important part is level 5 leadership, which is selecting who? The right people, the people who are not 100% confident, the people who are able to learn, the people who are able to exert energy and, you know, learn something new. Dr. Agada is saying that I wish I have some of their confidence. Yes, you know, the real scientist, the real expert level will always have 70 to 80% confidence, which what we know, you know, that what I say might be correct, most probably correct, but might be wrong. And what you say is most probably wrong, but might be correct. And, you know, the opposite, vice versa. Why is that important? Because at the end of the day, we need to find the truth. It's not about being self-centered with lots of ego in making the decisions, but actually being able to learn what is the right decision. Jim Collins mentioned in his model, Hedgehog, he said that for organizations to break through and to achieve great results, it always starts with having the right why. But the right why will only come by first selecting the right people. And the right people, like he mentioned before, level 5 leadership, focusing on who first, will enable you to select people with strong values, and they will be extremely disciplined, and their thoughts will be disciplined as well. So they will be able to deal with brutal facts. And this relates to the Dunning-Kruger effect. You know, brutal facts, they are called brutal because it might be upsetting. And for someone with ego and very self-centric, when you come and tell him you are wrong, they will always defend. And this is what Jim Collins says, that they don't need to defend, but they need to confront. And by the way, this is in the Psychology Review. You remember we looked at one of the books, which is Rescript by Dr. Colleen George. And she mentioned in her second letter, which is the E, engage rather than evade. So it's very important to engage and to face the brutal facts. This will never happen if you don't have the right people, because they need to have lots of courage and lots of clarity in their values. Then they apply the Hedgehog Concept. The Hedgehog Concept is basically the concept that relates to what you want to do, the why factor, which is the Japanese Ikigai that is mentioned in the Japanese, and they added one more dimension over here. But Jim Collins explained it in 3 main points, which is what are you really passionate about? What are you great at in terms of your skills? And what drives your engine and your economic engine? as an organization, and why do you exist? And if you are able to have that, then this is the beginning of the breakthrough of the organization, and the organization is able to go into completely new heights through disciplined actions. So the actions, as per Jim Collins, if we summarize his model of decision making, decisions are going to come from thoughts, and the thoughts are going to come from people, because it's very logic. And by the way, organizations are vibrant, they don't self-manage, but the organizations manage through people. So how would organizations manage through people? They will only manage if they are able, if the people are disciplined, and if they are able to show disciplined thoughts and face brutal facts. And this is what Jim Collins mentions. Drucker comes back to focus on the knowledge. And he says that knowledge is something that needs to be challenged. And this is relating as well to the facing brutal facts that Jim Collins has mentioned. But he defends the knowledge workers by saying the knowledge worker is going to also improve his colleagues and is going to improve the organizational knowledge base, which will create more opportunities and growth in the organization, which will reflect back to the self-growth and self-development. So he stresses a lot on the importance and the value of knowledge and what knowledge brings to the organization. We also remember the COCD model that we discussed that relates to how leaders should think outside the box, where we learn every day and we hear every day of thinking outside the box, thinking outside the box. How do we do that? And this is the COCD model that looks into the different decisions in terms of, are the ideas common or are they original? Are they tested before or not yet? If it is common and tested, then this is in the blue area. And we discussed before that the majority of decisions that leaders make are usually in the blue area because they are comfortable area, tested before, common, risk is very low. Where if you have an original idea that has been tested but in a different way, or people have done it in a different way, so there is some sort of feasibility in it, but not in your innovative way that you want to do it. So then this is what is called innovation, and this is the red zone, the wow factor. And if you have an original idea that has never been tested, then this becomes the yellow ideas, the inspiring ones, the creativities, the dreams, the challenge, and this is the real outside the box thinking in terms of making decisions. We come to the last part of the book, which is the leadership challenges. And you remember one of the biggest challenges that we discussed in terms of the leadership is what Jim Collins mentioned, and also Peter Drucker and several writers. You remember that letter? What is it called? And anyone remembers this letter? So this is the letter Ting in Chinese, and if you recall, the letter Ting is all about looking at human beings. So this is similar to the heart. So this is like the heart, and this is like the brain. So it's the mind, and this is the heart. Then this looks like the ears. So this is the ear factor. And then those look as the glasses, as you are, those are your eyes. And basically Atiyah is saying challenge and opportunity. This other one is Wai Chin Atiyah. This is in the risk taking, and we will talk about that in the psychology series when we look at Peter Clough and the mental toughness. But this letter is called Ting, and this is the difference. So the letter Ting is basically, like we mentioned, eyes, heart, ears, mind, and the ability to listen to your staff by all your senses. So that's what the letter Ting means, the ability to focus and listen to your employees and get their feedback. Why is that important? Because as it was also mentioned in the book Turn the Ship Around, that you really need to get your staff trust. And how can you get their trust if you don't listen to them? That's why listening to the employees is extremely important. It's challenging if we remember that now the leaders have to manage a lot of followers, and in a more complex way, gaining their trust and listening to all of them is something that is extremely challenging, but it's very important for leaders to gain their trust. Also, we looked at the charisma, and being accepted as a leader is very important on how to move forward and how to gain people's confidence, trust, and also passion to follow you. So the Halpert's dimension of charisma, we looked at the referent power and the expert power. Both of them form the charisma. So people can basically refer to you and they know that you are very knowledgeable in the area and you are expert, you have done it before, and they can trust you. And if you are a source of reference and inspiration in the job, all of that adds to your charisma. And in the book Charisma on Command, we looked at how charisma can be learned through improving your knowledge, improving emotional intelligence, improving your know-how, and also the delivery of the message, so that you are delivering the message in a way that gains trust and acceptance by people. And we link that into Stephen Covey's book, which is The Speed of Trust, where he defined the model of how the leaders gain trust in terms of two main points, which is character and competence. Of course, competence is something that everybody can learn. And this is what we discussed when Randa asked the question about the competence and how people can learn competence. And we said in the interviews, the capabilities like skills you can develop, knowledge you can develop, experience by time you can develop. In terms of results, once you start performing and people know that you are trusted and you are credible for producing results, you start developing a reputation for delivering results. And then competence is something that you can develop. Now, character needs a lot of work. Why is that? Because it has a lot of behaviors and values that you need to equip yourself with, because it's both related to intent and integrity. And this is what was mentioned now in the comments, where the integrity is something that is very important, and being able to deliver what people expect from you and walking the talk in what we say. So integrity is basically three things: honesty, fairness, and authenticity. So being authentic is knowing that you can never be perfect in everything. Being fair is the ability to deal with people objectively without putting personal relationships into the equation. And being honest is dealing with brutal facts, like what Jim Collins mentioned. Now, the intent is basically emotional intelligence, being able to care and show people that even if you are trying to exert pressure, it's for their own good. Transparent and honest with them. It relates to also delivering to them the right information at the right time, and being open to receive feedbacks. And also this relates to the ability to deal with brutal facts that Jim Collins mentioned. So if we look at the character part, this gives you the support that Jim Collins, when he mentioned select people first, who first before what they do, is very important, because then this is also supported by Stephen Covey, who said that in order to develop trust, you need that. And if you hire people with the right character in the beginning and the right values, you save yourself a lot of time, because that's 50% of the trust equation that you can gain once people are able to trust people because of their character and because of their confidence and trust in them. We also look at the turn the ship around when we looked at that when crises happen, the real leader is being tested for the ability to deal with crisis and ability to handle the ship when things are not really under control and in balance. And this is the formula of success of a leader who's able to put people into the right stress performance curve. Too much stress is burnout, and we don't want that. Too less stress is complacency and underload, and we don't need that. We need to keep people into this optimum stress zone, and this is a big part of the leadership success, into how to stretch people but not break them, and how to be able to put some pressure to make people perform. And we all need that in our lives. We need, in order for change to happen, and we will have change management series, of course, we need pressure and we need heat. And this is the leadership equation of how do you exert pressure and heat over people without burning them out and without keeping them in the complacent and underloaded zone. We then look into, again, once more, Drucker, who mentioned that one of the wrong information is that future is unpredictable. It's future, and he said, you don't need to really think about future decisions as they will be alive, but you need to have that the decisions, they are able to be vibrant. It's all about the present decisions, how we are able to change them and being able to modify them, because future is so unpredictable to the way, and we have seen, of course, in the COVID situation, how nobody has expected COVID to come the way it came, and the way it stopped business around. So how far the decisions that were made in 2019 have futurity, which is basically flexibility and practicality. And he looked at the three levels of thinking: analytical thinking, logical, and critical. And once we are only thinking analytical, we are unable to see the true picture. We need to look at what is logic and pragmatic, and then critically, how does this tie into the larger side of the organization? We then come to the last part, which is the Frederick Laloux in his book, when he described the teal organizations, he looked at the self-management concept. And it's very important to look at which level of the organization and where are people ready in order to move to a certain level of the organization. Red levels is what is delivered by authority, similar to Maxwell's and Jim Collins' level 1 leadership. It's all about power and position, and then growing into one level by level, into more flexibility in relationships, into more production focus, until you reach the teal organizations. And that's what he mentioned in his book, Reinventing Organizations, Frederick Laloux, that it's time for self-management. And in order to produce self-management, you need to hire the right people. So we can see that there is a trend, that there is some sort of an agreement between Frederick Laloux, between Jim Collins, between Maxwell. Hiring the right people is something that is extremely important for the organization. How do you define who are the right people? Based on what Kofi mentioned in his book, and based on Jim Collins, and based on the Transformational Leadership book as well, and Dilemmas of Leadership. It's all about learning how to select people based on values and the right values, rather than selecting people on competencies. Competencies can be learned in a very much quicker time, relevant to the learning from values and behaviors, because those take much longer time in comparison to learning skills. Last but not least, we go back to Winston Churchill, who summarizes the questions. It's all about how good are your questions. A lot of leaders like to, and a lot of people, not only leaders, they like comforting lies, and they don't like the unpleasant truth, which is the brutal fact that Jim Collins has mentioned. The ability of people to have the courage, to have the the ability and the analytical, critical, logical thinking. So in an order, analytical, logical, and critical thinking, in order to be able to absorb and analyze through information, the openness to receive the feedback, and the ability to ask good questions. Exactly like when someone asks the followers, how good was my decision? You are misleading them, and in a way to tell you that it is great, while if you say, what do you think about the decision? So if you ask good questions, you get good answers, and that's the power of good questions. Churchill mentioned, and he was one of the very successful leaders who took his country from defeat to victory. Facts are better than dreams. Dealing with brutal facts, ability to face and confront, and to engage rather than evade, like Colleen George mentioned in her book, Rescript, is a very big criteria of how a leader could be successful. So that was the review for today, 11 books of the leadership series of our library. In our next review, it is going to be the psychology series, and that's going to be the following Saturday. We now will stop the recording at that stage, and we will start the questions and contributions from the attendees.